Hey guys, welcome to another video. My name is Ian. Welcome back to the channel, Ian the Reader. Today, I have a video in which I will be recommending my favorite audiobooks. I'm gonna go ahead and take these off. It was just for the intro and thumbnail. So I love audiobooks. If you don't know that about me, I get through a lot of books every year, like somewhere between 150 to like 170 typically, and that's entirely due to audiobooks. If I only could be physically reading books and I couldn't do audiobooks, I get through like 20 to 30. And it's not because I don't love physically reading. I mean, look at all of these wonderful books back here. It's just because I don't have a lot of time to sit and read. And so I love stories, I love books, and so audiobooks are mostly what I do. So in the past 6 or 7 years, I guess, since I really got into audiobooks, I have listened to probably close to 1,000. Maybe not that many, but at least like 600 or 700, I would say. And so I've listened to a lot of different readers, a lot of different productions, a lot of different books, and I wanted to just recommend my favorites to you all. This isn't going to be an entirely comprehensive list. I went through and looked at as many audiobooks as I could that I had read, and I picked the ones that really stood out to me. So definitely check these ones out. But additionally, I did want to highlight some amazing narrators or readers, however you want to call it, that I just admire so much. And honestly, if you see that a book is read by any of these people, you're going to have a good time. It's going to be really well done. So these are my favorite readers, but we're going to go ahead and talk about specifically some titles that I want to recommend to you all that I think are just wonderfully experienced in audio format. The reason that I'm choosing to film this now is because Audible, which is one of the many different sources that I use to listen to audiobooks, currently has a site-wide sale going on where you can get a lot of books. Like literally every book is discounted at least a little bit, but a lot of them are discounted to like 85% off. I got a bunch of books for like $3 the other day, so definitely check that out. I'm not like paid to promote that. I just think it's a great opportunity to save some money on some audiobooks. Also check out Libro FM if you haven't already. That's a great way to support indie bookstores through the purchase of audiobooks, and I always recommend using your library as well. Most libraries have a pretty extensive catalog of digital books and audiobooks. You just have to really ask. And there are also some libraries that you can search online that will allow you to get library cards even if you don't live in the area. So definitely check that out if you're somebody who wants to get into more audiobooks. Before we get into the video though, it would mean the absolute world to me if you would like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. I post videos 2 to 3 times every week talking about all sorts of books, and is the perfect time to subscribe because we are at the end of a year, so I'll have all of the fun year-end list videos coming out very, very soon, like my best of the year, my honorable mentions, my most disappointing, my series update, my plans for 2025. It's a great time to join the Ian the Reader community, whatever that means. So I would truly appreciate it if you would just join me for the next videos, please. But without any further ado, let's jump into my favorite audiobooks of all time. I want to get a couple obvious ones out of the way first. So let's start off with the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. This series is written by Matt Dinniman and is narrated fantastically by Jeff Hayes. I am telling you, you cannot ask for a more exciting and fun audiobook experience than listening to the Dungeon Crawler Carl series. Not only is Matt Dinniman's writing so hilarious and ridiculous and unexpected, constantly taking your breath away with how absurd the story gets. But Jeff Hayes, this one man, does a phenomenal job of bringing so many characters to life. Like, I had a hard time believing when listening to this book that this all came from one person. It wasn't until I watched a video of like a live reading that I was like, okay, this is one guy. He's just doing it all on his own. It's absolutely incredible. If you don't know anything about Dungeon Crawler Carl, this is a series that follows a man named Carl and his cat, Princess Donut, who are thrust into this game show type situation. Basically, aliens come down and destroy Earth, shove all of the things that are on Earth beneath the surface, and those that survive that are forced to either basically enter slavery or enter this game. They have to go on this quest basically to progress through this maze-like thing where they come across the most insane obstacles and things like that, and they have to progress through this game show, he and his cat, and it is just so delightful. Like, this series is absurd, and again, you cannot ask for a better production or better narration than with this series. I cannot imagine choosing to physically read these personally. Like, the 7th book is now out in ebook and physical book only, but I have to wait for the audiobook, because it wouldn't be the same reading it rather than listening to it. So yes, highly recommend Dungeon Crawler Carl. If you just want a good time, you can't ask for anything better than this. Next up is probably the best audiobook experience I have ever had. That is Project Hail Mary. This is by Andy Weir, and it is read by Ray Porter. Ray Porter does an excellent job. I've listened to quite a few books narrated by him, but this isn't because it's Ray Porter that I recommend this book specifically. So I'm not going to tell you why I recommend this one, because it's a little bit spoilery, but there's a certain production choice that is made with this book that is just so stunning and so immersive, and just, it's incredible. It really, really is. Like, I promise you, you will not regret listening to this on audio if you choose to do the audiobook format, because this is a book that I feel like adds a whole nother level to the experience by listening to it. This is an incredible book on its own. So we follow a man named Ryland Grace, I believe is his name, and he wakes up on this spaceship, and everybody else who was on it is dead, and he's the only one there, and he has no memory of how he got there, what he's doing, where he's supposed to be going, how he's going to get home. He has no idea why he's there, and he slowly has to figure out who he is. I don't think he even remembers his name at first when he wakes up, but he slowly has to piece together the past and this puzzle of what he's doing there, and slowly he realizes that he has a great mission that he is on, and he is the only one who can save possibly all of humanity. So that's what the story is about. But again, there is something that I can't tell you about because it would ruin part of the story. That is just a whole nother level of an experience. Trust me, if you were to just listen to one audiobook in your life, one, not a whole series, but one specific book, I think it would have to be Project Hail Mary, because it is next level. Absolutely incredible. The next two books that I wanted to recommend to you are kind of a style of audiobook that will work for some people and won't work for others. For me, typically, this style doesn't work, but these two books in particular worked really well. The style of audiobook I'm talking about is full cast narration. So most audiobooks are read by one specific person who, despite the fact that there are a lot of characters, will use different dialects or voices or what have you to communicate the fact that a different person is talking. Full cast audiobooks typically have a specific narrator for each character, at least each main character of the production. Now, for me personally, that can sometimes be distracting. I typically listen to audiobooks at an elevated speed. I speed it up to typically somewhere between 2 to 3 times speed. 2.5 is like my usual, but depending upon the book, I fluctuate between 2 to 3. But because of that, the full cast can be really disorienting and take me out of the experience because it's harder to follow at the faster speed. However, these next two books I want to talk to you about, I feel like are really, really well done with the full cast narration. And not only is it something where it's just a choice they made to give each character something, a little bit of a different voice, it makes sense with these two audiobooks why there's a full cast. The first of those is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I'm not going to tell you all the specific readers because, again, the performances are great, but it's more the fact that there is a full cast in general rather than specific people who are doing a spectacular job. That really makes this book and the other one what it is. But yes, Daisy Jones and the Six is essentially a story about a fictional band, loosely inspired by like Fleetwood Mac. And it's about their sudden rise and sudden fall. And it's taking place later on, like present day, and there are interviews with the band members talking about the whole situation and everything that happened. The reason that this is so well done, similarly to the other one we'll talk about in a minute, is that it's kind of like an interview format. You've got the person who's like asking questions and then getting the answers and feedback and commentary from all these different people who were involved in the things that happened. So it really almost reads like a documentary that you're listening to, or like a really great podcast or something like that. This is a book that would not work if one person was reading it, in my opinion. And so I think that Daisy Jones and the Six is a really fantastic one. I also recommend, if you want to, this is a TV show as well, and there's a soundtrack to the TV show. When I was listening to this audiobook, when they would talk about a song, I would go and check the soundtrack to see if they did that song in the show, and if they did, I would listen to it, and it would definitely add something to the experience, even though they took some creative liberties with those things. So definitely recommend both the audiobook for Daisy Jones and the Six and listening to the soundtrack. It's a great mix. The other full cast audiobook that I wanted to recommend is called Sleeping Giants. This book is by Sylvain Neuvel. This is a really, really interesting audiobook experience as well. So essentially in this story, it is a science fiction story in which the main character, or not the main character, but the first character of the story is an 11-year-old girl at the start of it, and she falls into a hole and lands on this giant robotic hand. Fast forward into the future, she's now a scientist researching this robotic hand and what it is, where it came from, and all that jazz. And the story is told through different audio files that are collected around this whole research stuff. So it's not necessarily always two people talking. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's somebody's field notes. Sometimes it is a court case being read off or something like that. There are a lot of different types of media in this story, so it's like epistolary in that way, and kind of mixed media, but it works so well in audio format. One, because you get a very distinct voice from a lot of different characters, which is important, but you also get the back and forth dialogue. Like, this book thrives on dialogue and so much less on description, and so it works really, really well because it's mostly dialogue driven, and it just adds something to the story, the fact that it's being read by a lot of different people. It really almost feels like a drama, like you're not really listening to a podcast or a book. It feels like you're watching a show. And I think that is something that definitely adds to the quality of the book. This is another one of those that I can't imagine physically reading. Daisy Jones and the Six, maybe I could, but I feel like listening to this is the absolute best way to experience Sleeping Giants by Sylvain Neuvel. Moving away from that, I wanted to highlight a couple books that just have stellar performances. So the first of those is Misery by Stephen King. It is read by Lindsay Krause. When I tell you that this book and the way it is read is so unhinged. So if you don't know anything about Misery, we follow a man named Paul Sheldon, who is a writer, and he gets into a car crash and is rescued by a nurse who just so happens to be his #1 fan. And while she is nursing him back to health, she may also be holding him captive. And so things go from there. But the performance in this book was stellar. Like, it's one of the best audiobooks I've listened to for a reason, and it entirely comes down to the fact that Lindsay Krause just does a phenomenal job bringing the antagonist to life. This is a story that is very isolated. It primarily takes place in this one setting with Paul Sheldon and Annie Wilkes, who is the antagonist of the story, and the way she brings these two characters to life, particularly Annie Wilkes, it is just absolutely riveting. It is an audiobook that had me on the edge of my seat. I was trembling, guys. Like, this book was crazy on its own, but listening to it was a whole nother level of unhinged and crazy and just a good time. So Misery is a fantastic book to read physically as well, but I personally recommend listening to it because the narration is just incredible. Next, I want to highlight the Red Rising series. So this is initially narrated by one person, that being Tim Gerard Reynolds. He narrates the original 3 books, and then in the following books, there are multiple narrators. I'll put their names here because really, I think they all do a great job, but the thing that I'm really impressed by is Tim Gerard Reynolds' performance in the first 3 books of the Red Rising series. Now, Tim Gerard, I can't really say that name very well. Tim Gerard Reynolds does a fantastic job in anything that he narrates. However, one thing that is really unique about this book is that we follow a character who is slowly acclimating to a brand new environment, brand new culture, brand new everything. So we follow Darrow, who is on the lowest tier of his class system. He is a red, and he essentially, through a series of circumstances, attempts to infiltrate the highest level of his class system, that being the golds. That is a lengthy and in-depth process for him, and part of that is him having to adjust the way he acts, the way he moves, the way he speaks, his dialect. And one thing I thought was really fantastic was the way that the narrator, Tim Gerard Reynolds, takes this character of Darrow and has him start out talking in a certain way. And slowly through the progression of the story, he begins to modulate and adjust to be more like the golds that he is supposed to be emulating. I thought that was so well done. It's something that could have been very poorly handled. They could have either just chosen not to do the dialect adjustment at all, or it could have been really clunky or really sudden, like he goes from one extreme to the other. Instead, it was a progression that I truly appreciated. There were even moments throughout the experience where Darrow's red accent would slip back in when he was supposed to be talking and acting like a Gold, and that was something that was so well handled by the narrator. I was just so blown away by that performance. And again, he is in all of the books, but primarily the first 3 books. His focused, consistent narration was so incredible, and I was so impressed by what he brought to the table with the Red Rising series. Next up, we have a series that I absolutely adore, and a big part of that is due to the narration. That series is the Dresden Files. This is by Jim Butcher, and the audiobooks are read by James Marsters, who is primarily an actor. He is best known for being, I think, Spike in the Buffy the Vampire Slayer TV series. I haven't watched that, but honestly, I'm compelled to simply because of James Marsters, because his performance in the Dresden Files is on another level. And I'm hesitant to recommend him as a narrator for audiobooks in general, because I do know that he's read a handful of other books at least, but he narrates the entire 17 plus book series of the Dresden Files, and he at this point is Harry Dresden. Like if I hear James Marsters talk, I'm like, oh, that's Harry Dresden, not James Marsters. And so, yeah, he's a great narrator, but I'm sorry, it doesn't matter what he's reading. I'm going to hear the character Harry Dresden from the Dresden Files. If you don't know anything about the Dresden Files, this is a detective series, a urban fantasy detective series. Basically, we follow a wizard detective named Harry Dresden, who is a character that you root for at times and are totally aggravated by at other times. It's a series that a lot of people quit early on, and I don't blame them, because Harry is cringy, he is womanizing at times, he's very much inspired by like the noir pulp fiction type protagonist, and so he is definitely questionable sometimes, but he's a character that ultimately has a lot of heart and you end up rooting for once you get used to how dumb he can be, and he also just kind of warms up to you a little bit and grows a lot as well. It's a series that is episodic at first, feels like kind of a case of the week type story, but eventually progresses into being a much larger story with an amazing cast of characters and just so much payoff throughout the series. I love the Dresden Files. I know it's not for everybody, but it's for me, and James Marsters is what sells me on it, and it's what makes this a series that I love rereading. I can pick up any audiobook from the series and just be totally immersed because James Marsters is there to welcome me with open arms. He's my guy. He is Harry Dresden. Such a fantastic job. Next up, I want to talk about a kind of sub-genre of audiobooks, and that is audiobooks narrated by the author who wrote the book. This is kind of a touchy subject for me because sometimes it works really, really well, and sometimes it absolutely doesn't. Now, my personal recommendation is if it's nonfiction, try to get the audiobook if it's read by the author. Nonfiction works so well for that because it's the writer really talking about their own personal experience or personal research or things like that. My issue with fiction is sometimes you really want somebody who is more of a performer to be reading the book if it's a fiction story, because you want to be immersed in the story and the characters and the action or whatever it is. And in those instances, I think the authors should more often than not leave the narrating to the professionals. So if it's a fiction book and it's read by the author, maybe it'll be good, maybe it won't. I've had mixed experiences, some really great, some not so much. However, if it's nonfiction, I definitely recommend getting the audiobook if it's narrated by the person who wrote it. And the example I want to give here is the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green. I love John Green. I could listen to that man talk about anything and everything, and I do because I watch his YouTube channel in which he does talk about anything and everything, and I absolutely adore that. And that's really what the Anthropocene Reviewed is. It's a series of essays that John Green wrote about so many different topics. Sometimes it is really big, profound things, and other times it's less profound things like Diet Dr. Pepper. But what's incredible is John Green, being the person that he is, manages to make even the most tedious and everyday common items profound because it's who he is. And that bleeds so much into his performance, into his just mannerisms, his voice, everything about the Anthropocene Reviewed just resonated with me. And a big part of that was due to the fact that it was just John Green talking to me like he's John Green. And what could you ask for more than that, because it was really just a wonderful experience. So like I said, nonfiction, definitely try to get the audiobook if it's read by the author. I particularly recommend the Anthropocene Reviewed. But those are my thoughts on audiobooks narrated by the author. Next, I want to recommend a fantasy trilogy that was just such a delight and was so surprisingly good. Not necessarily because I didn't expect it to be good, but the audiobook experience just blew me away. And that series is the Threadlight trilogy by Zach Argyle. This was my first experience with Adam Gold, who is just an incredible narrator. My gosh, this guy, I could just listen to him like read off like terms and conditions, and it'd be like, wow, that was incredible, my friend, incredible. Adam Gold just does such a great job of narrating, and he so well matched Zach Argyle's story and writing style. I think that this combination was just absolutely incredible. If you don't know anything about the Threadlight trilogy, this is a fantasy series, which is so short. Also, I want to say I love that. These audiobooks are like 12 hours long, sometimes shorter than that. I love a short fantasy book because sometimes I don't want these giant, chunky, 60-hour-long audiobooks. I'm looking at you, Brandon Sanderson. Sometimes I want a 12-hour-long fantasy audiobook, and this was that, and it was awesome. Anyway, tangent aside, the Threadlight trilogy is a series that follows really a handful of different characters, but we have a very unique magic system at play here, and part of that is based on eye color, and if you're born with certain color eyes, you are seen as someone who isn't really worthy of continuing society in a normal way, and so you're kind of forced into this system. You're blinded and forced to serve the community in this way. And essentially, these two parents at the start of the story, their child is born and they realize that he's going to be taken away from them, and so they do whatever it takes to save him. And I just love having a series where the protagonists are parents and are adults. So nice, so refreshing. But anyway, I also really love the magic system here. The world building was fantastic. Great characters with some incredibly beautiful moments about parenthood, about trauma, about the decisions we make for those that we love and the sacrifices we're willing to make. This series was incredible. I highly recommend the Threadlight trilogy in general, but if you can get the audiobook version, do it. And actually you can, because I forgot, it's free on YouTube. It's been uploaded by the author on this YouTube channel that posts free audiobooks. So I'll leave a link to that down below. Check out the Threadlight trilogy, you guys. It is stunning, really good. Next, I want to recommend one of my all-time favorite books, that being The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. And this book is beautiful. It is so gorgeous. The language is stunning and just riveting and will sweep you away. And I do want to highlight the fact that the narrator does a great job. His name is Jonathan Davis. And he does a really great job. He really does. And he does a fantastic job of bringing the language to life. It is so mesmerizing and beautiful. And he really nails the accents and the characterization and the voices. He does a great job. However, the reason that I'm recommending this audiobook is because of the production of this. So there is often, especially in like older audiobooks, the tendency from the production to include a lot of music, and sometimes that is so distracting. Like, I'll be listening to an older Stephen King audiobook and suddenly there will be this crashing noise of percussion and so much going on. It's so loud I can't hear what the narrator's saying. It's so distracting. It completely takes me out of the experience. But with this one, there's just this most lovely piano melody that occasionally just drifts softly into the audiobook, and it just sets the scene so nice. Like, so nicely. It is just, when it would come in, my heart would soar and I would just feel so immersed in the story. And so this is one of the few occasions in which I think audio or like music that is continually brought back into the story works, because I get you have to have music at the beginning and end of an audiobook, kind of like rolling the credits or what have you, but more often than not it's distracting. This instance, it's not distracting, it's beautiful, highly recommend. Next up, we have another book that I can't really tell you why it's so good, but just trust me, you're gonna want to listen to this one on audio, and that book is I'm Thinking of Ending Things. This is by I don't know. His name is Ian too. It's Ian something. Ian Reed, maybe? I can't remember, but the book is called I'm Thinking of Ending Things. It's right here, and it is read by Candace Thaxton. So this is a very interesting story. We follow a young woman who is visiting her boyfriend's family over the holidays, or I think just on a winter night. They're driving throughout this desolate winter land to this farmhouse where his parents live and where he grew up. But things aren't quite right between them. The title obviously hinting at the fact that she's thinking of ending things. Just read this book. It is weird, it is wacky, it is one that I don't necessarily think will be for everyone. And so if this book sounds good to you, listen to it. If it doesn't sound good to you, maybe don't, because you might not enjoy it. But if you're gonna read this book in any way, then do the audio version, because it really adds something very unique to the listening experience. Just have two more here. The first one of those is The Godfather. This is by Mario Puzo, and it is read by Joe Mantegna, who is an actor, most famously known for Criminal Minds. He's this guy, but he does a fantastic job. Like, my goodness, the way that he just brings the story to life. And it is truly quite the task to narrate The Godfather, because this is one of the most iconic stories in pop culture ever. I mean, The Godfather Part 1 and Part 2 specifically, those two movies are iconic, some of the greatest films of all time. And so when you are bringing this to life through the audiobook, it must have been quite the task. And they got the guy for it, because the way that this person, Joe Mantegna, reads all of these characters, there's a certain level of familiarity between them because they're in a lot of the same families with the same backgrounds and things like that, but he differentiates them in such a well-done way that the accents are all present, but it's very clear who is talking. And the performances, like, he truly acts when he's bringing these characters to life, and it is a performance that is worthy of the story, worthy of the book, worthy of the movies, and honestly, I couldn't imagine a better performance in this audiobook. It is fantastic. So many more people need to be reading The Godfather, because yes, the movie is amazing, but the book is amazing too. Definitely check out The Godfather on audiobook. And lastly, I wanted to recommend another fantasy book, that being The Lives of Locke Lamora. This is by Scott Lynch, and it is narrated by Michael Page. This is a book that I tried physically reading for a number of years. I picked it up every once in a while. I'd get like 30 pages into it and I'd be like, it's fine. It's okay. You know, I wasn't compelled to pick up anymore. It's kind of a slower story at first, more character driven, kind of laying the foundation for the things that are going to happen in the second half, and I just was not invested enough in the story to commit to it. Then I got the audiobook, and when I tell you I was swept away by Michael Page's performance, he brings so much life, so much humor, so much character to this story. Like, the audiobook enhances the experience of The Lives of Locke and Lamora so much. It immediately hooks you in a way that reading it physically just did not do for me. And so that's why I have to recommend this audiobook, specifically for the first book. I don't know if he reads the second and third books yet, because I have not read those yet, but it sold me on the book, and that's something that is hard to do, especially when I listen to it at a faster speed, or I'm listening to so many different stuff, and it's a book that I already kind of have some skepticism about because I've struggled with in the past. The fact that Michael Page was able to come into this fantasy book that I'd already tried to get into, and he sold me on it immediately, like, that speaks volumes. It really does. If you don't know anything about The Lives of Locke Lamora, this is a fantasy series that currently has 3 books. The author says he's going to continue it, and he's currently working on some novellas for it. It's been a while since book 3 came out, though, so keep that in mind. But in this, we follow Locke Lamora and his band of thieves. As they're really more than thieves. They're like con men. They run these cons, and you kind of get a past and present story that is meshed together throughout the story in a really incredible way. And really, the character of Locke and Jean, his kind of like second, is just so fun, but also really, really dark. This story goes some places I didn't expect, and I think that Michael Page really nailed both sides of it, the humor and the darkness. He just perfectly brought to life every aspect of this story. I cannot recommend the audiobook version of The Lives of Locke Lamora enough. It's great. So those are all of the audiobooks that I want to recommend to you all today. I may do a part 2 of this at some point because, like I said, I do listen to a ton of audiobooks every year, and so I'm always finding new favorites, new favorite narrators, new favorite performances, new favorite productions. I love audiobooks. I'm a huge advocate for them. If you want to get into reading, there's no easier or better way than an audiobook. I highly recommend it. Let me know if you are interested in checking out any of these titles, though, if you've already listened to them, and please, 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 let me know what your favorite audiobook performances are in the comments. I would truly appreciate it because, like I said, I'm always looking for more audiobooks. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!